Hi again, it's Carlos Tanner from the Ayahuasca Foundation. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope that you enjoyed the previous episodes, and hopefully this episode will provide some benefit for you too. In the last episode, I talked a lot about how nature knows and the perfection of nature through unquestionable faith. Plants have faith because they are so intimately connected to the entire body that they make up. And we are a part of that body too, but it seems like we forget that we are connected, that we have access to all of the consciousness, all of the wisdom of the entirety of Earth and the universe. And through that, and through a connection, we can gain more faith to know that everything will work out and to trust the process. I want to talk a little bit more about how we can trust the process, but also how the communication, how that connection works, and we were talking about plant dietas being a way to create relationships with plants so that you could receive information from them and communicate with them. And I want to share a couple of those stories with you, and then try to relate those to regular life or everyday life. A very interesting thing about communication with plant spirits is that it is a two-way street. I mean, it is a sharing, and sometimes plant spirits have a message for you, which is, I would say, like their greatest goal, perhaps you could say. What would be like the perfect thing, but yet it doesn't always fit. Sometimes a plant spirit might say, like, you need to live in the jungle for 5 years, and that might not really work for you, for where you're at with your life, and it's okay to come back and say, well, I can't really do that, but how about this? And there is actually like a negotiation. Our courses, we have training courses with the Ayahuasca Foundation. There's a 4-week course and an 8-week course, and in those courses there are dietas, plant dietas, and the maestros, the curanderos that lead those programs, they negotiate with the plant spirits on behalf of the students, because there are limitations. The students often can't just spend years in the jungle, so there is a negotiation that happens between the maestro and the plant spirits to work out the details of those diets for them. And that was like a really interesting phenomenon for me. I think that you kind of consider, well, the plant spirit says something, that's it, that's what you should do, or that's like the word of God, or however, it's like solid, it's set in stone. But it's not. It's so set in stone. There is the ability there's leeway, to work out. And so a particular example was like a plant spirit said to me, like, you need to diet me for 1 year. And I was like, 1 year? I can't do that, man. Like, I can't be away from my family for that long. I have a daughter and I have a wife, and I can't just say, okay, I'm going to the jungle for a year. My life is different than my teachers, in the sense that they lived in the jungle their whole life. It was their culture, and so to raise a family in the jungle was just totally normal. And so if you were a curandero, your wife lived in the jungle with you, your kids lived in the jungle with you. I'm coming from the West, and that's who I am. And my wife has a master's degree and is a lawyer. I wasn't going to tell her, like, hey, by the way, now you're going to live in the jungle. And I wasn't going to, in my mind, limit the opportunities available to my children or to my daughter because of my path. And so those were decisions that I came up with, and that's how I feel like my life needs to go. And yeah, it's different. I'm coming from a very different perspective than the teachers I have who lived in their jungle their whole life. And so I was dieting plant spirits that were like imposing on me a perspective that I didn't have. Like I wasn't from the jungle. And so I needed to respond by sharing my perspective, so that we could find a middle ground, which we were able to do by doing a series of shorter diets that cumulatively would add up to the same amount of time, but it would take a lot longer to achieve. And that was, that was a solution that worked for the plant spirits that were wanting me to do a long diet, and worked for me for wanting to achieve the same goal, but yet having to consider certain obligations I had in my life. And I think that's a great example of how communication should happen, even on a person-to-person level, rather than communication with interdimensional communication, you could call it. A lot of times we forget that there is another perspective. We forget that the person that we're speaking to, or the person that's speaking to us, comes from a different perspective. And that is such a valuable tool. In fact, we should be teaching that in school. We should be teaching communication, and we should be teaching awareness of perspective as a class, because it's so important. And here's another great example. Like, if I am describing a house, let's say, and I'm in the front yard looking at the house, and I'm saying, okay, there's a red door right in the middle, there's windows on the sides, and there's bushes in front with some yellow flowers, and there's a walkway and a light post and a mailbox, whatever. I know that that's true. I'm looking at it with my own eyes. I know it is true. But I'm communicating that to someone who is in the backyard. And they're saying, no way. There's no red door, and there's no yellow flowers, there's no light post, there's no mailbox. All of that stuff is wrong. I'm looking at the house, and there's a big chimney, and there's a deck, and there's a sliding door, but it's made of glass, and and all of whatever the back looks like. Now the two of you could argue, because you both know you're right. But the difference is that, yeah, you're both right, except your perspectives are different. And so what would be the optimal? Well, you'd want to share those perspectives. You'd want to explain to the other person where you're coming from. From what angle are you looking at this subject matter, in this case the house? And then if you listen to each other instead of defending what you know to be true from your perspective, then you can gain an expanded perspective, in which case you can say, now I know what the back of the house looks like, and that person knows what the front of the house looks like, and now I'm getting a bigger picture here. And now you imagine talking to people on the sides of the house, inside the house, maybe up on the roof, whatever, and you end up getting a more complete picture. And that's what communication could be for us, if we can understand the nature of perspectives and the value of perspectives. And that was a really big lesson for me, to see that plant spirit consciousness was so real, but yet also I could share in it. It was collaborative, and that was a way to also help empower me and to give myself a voice, even when communicating with spirits of such high magnitude, such wisdom, and such an honor to be involved in those conversations. And I guess that comes back to what I touched upon before, which is the perfection of nature, and more importantly, that we are nature, that you are nature. And so that's an empowering aspect of it too. Again, early on, we talked about trauma, and I think that understanding perspectives is a really important insight into understanding trauma in an unusual way, I guess, because oftentimes trauma involves another person, and sometimes we want to hold that person accountable and blame that person, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, but to understand perspective, I do think is helpful towards processing and moving forward. And what I mean by that is that everyone suffers. Everyone has gone through something. And I think when you're a child, you want to look at your parents as perfect. You want to look at them as the keepers of all the wisdom and knowledge. And so if they do something that is harmful or they do something detrimental, then you blame them. You say, well, you're supposed to be like this. We hold them to these standards. We often forget that they were children too. In fact, everyone was a child, and everyone suffered some form of childhood trauma on some level in their spectrum. And I think that understanding that can make it a lot easier to forgive actions, but also can motivate compassion. And I've seen many times, and especially in my own healing experience, people become aware of the fact that the people that they held responsible for their own pain were also victims of some sort and had suffering in themselves as well. And that's a powerful thing to understand. So it kind of changes your perspective in a way that when someone is basically being an asshole, you don't just say, what an asshole. It's behind it. You say, wow, that person's suffering. And in that regard, you can use a expanded perspective to generate compassion. And through that compassion, you can get to those levels that we also discussed about loving something and gaining influence over it through resonating with it at the highest level. So I do feel like communication and understanding perspectives is a big part of that, and that was something also that I came to discover through working with plant spirits and the perspectives that they had, the spirits had for me, and how I was able to share where I was coming from in a way that allowed me to come to an equal understanding and work out a plan that benefited all parties. And that's essentially what is life. We're trying to collaborate, we're trying to cooperate, we're trying to work together to achieve the highest good for all. And if it doesn't seem like that, then there's most likely suffering going on, there's most likely trauma going on, there's most likely illness, and there's a motivation and compassion for healing. And it's easy to say, and it's tough to feel, but hopefully with a shift in perspective, it can be easier to achieve. I want to touch more on that in the next episode, especially with regard to forgiveness. That's a very, very big part of the healing process, and I want to perhaps present like a new way of looking at it, and hopefully maybe a new way of achieving it. Thanks so much. I hope that this was beneficial for you. We've only got a couple more episodes left, so I'm gonna try to pull the pieces together, and I hope to finish with a kind of summary of it all in more succinct terms. If you want to like and subscribe, I would love that, and if you want to comment, I'll do my best to respond. If you want to contact me through the website, I'll also definitely respond. The website, ayahuascafoundation.org. You can see our programs that we offer in the Amazon rainforest. And to the people who have commented or who have written to me privately, thank you so much for doing that and reaching out. And thank you to my friends, some of whom I haven't been in contact with for over 10 years. It's been awesome to hear from you as well. And yeah, I hope that everyone watching can receive some benefit from these videos, and I think that I'll most likely be doing more after this series finishes. So thanks again. I hope that you have a great day, and take care.